Hi, everyone. Welcome once again to CORTS, Center for Operations Research and Data Science. My name is Kwame Ade, and I'm the founder and director of CORTS. And I also double as an assistant professor of business analytics at Minnesota State University, Moorhead. So the objective of today's video is to understand data types in R and how to convert them. So in general, these are the major data types that you encounter in R. The common one is character variables. Now, character variables are used to store text, and these texts may be in the form of strings. Now, their structure is such a way that they contain either letters, words, or a combination of both text and numbers. And you often find them enclosed in quotes. So a typical example is when you have United States, Canada, and Mexico in your data set, then they can be termed as character variables. Now, a similar variable to character variable are factor variables or factors. So these two type of variables, that's character variables and factor variables, fall under a broad category called categorical variables or discrete variables. However, the main distinction between factor variables and character variables is that factor variables are ordinal, or they follow an ordinal scale, or we can also say they are ordered. Meanwhile, character variables are not ordered. So, for instance, if you look at your grades will be an example of a factor variable, wherein we see A being the highest, B being the next, C, D, E, and F. So this is an example of a factor variable. Also, when we look at classifications of students, like having freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior, this is also a factor variable because there is an ordering or an order in that level. Then another common type of data type or structure we see in R is the numeric. So with the numeric, it represents any numerical value. And the good thing is this could be either a whole number or they could be in decimals. Now, just as we saw for the character and factor variable, there is a similar group to numeric variable, and these are called integers. However, the distinction is that integers do not allow for decimals. Then, as you run your R models with panel data, time series data, and so forth, you will encounter a lot of dates. So the dates are also in different formats. So for instance, if you see the DTTM, it's a date and a time, and then you also see another date, which also represents dates. And we will look at all these versions when we see our R script. Then the final one we want to talk about are the logical type of data. And this logical type of data, it captures either a true or false information. You can also see it being called the Boolean data type or Boolean values. So with this brief description of the data types, let's go to our R script and see some applications. Okay, so the data set I'm going to use in this example is the MSCI data set. I'll first import the data set and then we'll try and look at the data. So I use this function or this package, which is readr package. And this package is helpful for importing CSV files. So I call it in from my directory and I run this here. So when I run, I go on to R and check to see if my data set showed up. So I'll share this screen. And then here we see that this data is showing up. So just looking at this will not give me any information on how the data looks like and how the individual variables look like. So I'll come here and then I perform a few lines of code. So one thing I can do is I can just use the head to look at the first few rows rather than looking at the whole data. So if I use head and then I type into brackets the name of the data, it will actually give me the first 6 rows. But because I don't want to look at the first 6 rows, I'll just say it should show me the first 2 rows. So I click on run and then I come here, I check my console. And I'm seeing my first 2 rows here in my console. So row 1 and then row 2. Then the next thing I want to do is I want to summarize the data and then see at least some descriptive statistics. So when I click on this, I come back here to see the descriptive statistics. So let's look at the descriptive statistics and be sure if everything is okay. So the ticker is a character variable. The name is a character variable. Now, when you look at the weight here, I'm seeing the minimum weight, the first quartile, the median, the mean, the third quartile, maximum, and all these are showing me as numeric. But the few things of interest are, let's look at dividend yield. Dividend yield is supposed to be a numeric variable. But here, R is telling me that it is a character variable. Similarly, my expectation was that price to cash flow should have been a numeric variable, and it's telling me it's a character variable. Now we see that these inconsistencies are showing for book price to book ratio, price to sales, the return, and then return on equity. So the question I'm asking myself is, what happened? So in order to see it, I just want to confirm if what I'm seeing is right. So I now come here and I type the structure of the data set. So I say str into brackets, the name of my data. So once I run this, it gives me the structure of the data. So here is the structure of my data set. So I check here and the ticker is a character, the name is a character, weight is numeric, market capitalization is numeric, but dividend yield is character. But I'm seeing numbers here. So why is it not showing as numeric? Price to cash flow is also showing character. So we see for all those variables, they are showing as character. Whereas our expectation was that because they were in numbers, they should have shown as numeric. So the primary reason why at times this happens is that when you have missing values and you don't in CSV or Excel, and you don't indicate NA for missing values in the CSV document, and you just leave that space as blank, R is going to convert that and assume that that whole column that you had is a character variable. So that is the problem we are now encountering here. So what do? We follow this few lines of code to convert those variables into numeric. Now, before we convert those variables, we want to be sure that what are the names that R is storing for the titles. Remember, we imported the data into R. So R automatically named or gave a format for the column names for us. So for us to be able to see what the column names are, I type names and my data set, and then I run. Then I come back here and I check. So these are the names that R is giving to me. So I bring that one or these names here. And then given these names that I have here, what I now want to do is I want to follow the nomenclature by R. And then in following the nomenclature by R, I can convert them into numeric variables. So let's look at dividend yield. So this is dividend yield. So I come here and I tell R that go into the data called ACWI and then select this variable in the data. And then when you select this variable in the data, I want you to convert this variable into a numeric variable and then maintain the same name in the data set. So I run that one and then I follow the same procedure for cash flow, for price to book, for price to sales, for return on equity, and then for return. So when I run, I just have to check here and be sure. So what you are seeing here is that those that were missing values, now R has introduced them by coercion. So it's not going to leave it as missing and convert the whole columns to character again for me. So at least this is something good. So then the next thing we want to do is we want to now summarize the data and see what you get. So this is the summary of the data. And then in the summary of the data, let's look at dividend yield. So you see now, dividend yield is not showing as character again. We have the minimum for dividend yield and we have the maximum for dividend yield. However, this time it is telling us the number of non-available observations in that particular column. The number of non-available observations are 523. Now let's see price to cash flow. Price to cash flow here, it's now showing us the minimum and the maximum. And it is telling us that the number of non-availables are 127. Price to book, the number of non-availables are 64. Price to sales, the number of non-availables are 7. Return on equity, the number of non-availables are 77. And then returns by itself, the number of non-availables are 36. So, with that being said, we can go ahead and look at the various date formats that R has. So, for instance, I want to look at today's date, that's the current date. I just type date and then into brackets, and then I come and check. So this is this date format. So it is telling me that today is Tuesday, January 28th, 11:33, and the year is 2025. If I use system.date into brackets, it tells me the date in this particular format where we have year first, the month, and the day. Now, the structure of the date and the structure of the date system, I run both of them together, and then we see the structures being shown here. So it tells us that the structure of the date, the first one I ran, is a character. And then the structure of the second one is a date. So with that being said, we now know how to view the structure of our variables or our data in R. And we now know how to convert from a character variable to a numeric variable. Thank you very much.